You're listening to Airey Bros Radio. Be there or be square, because it's all killer, no filler.
Now I'm passion driven instead of goal driven. I'm in the fight of my life because the hardest person I've ever had to fight is myself. I'm going to introduce you to Dave Schultz. You know, I said, Dave, is everything going to be okay? He says, listen, just worry about wrestling. I got everything handled here. Gene Mills meeting me when I was in high school was just such a coincidental thing. One of the best moments of my entire life. Because I had chased this thing my whole life. There are no shortcuts. There really are no shortcuts. It is the times that I've taken the long way there that I appreciate more than anything else. And it just so happened to be where Pat Miltage went to high school. So I was a freshman. Pat was a senior. I'm not a doctor. I tried to play one many times in my life. This is Mark Kerr, and you're listening to Airey Bros Radio. The longtime fans of MMA understand it in a way that some of the newer fans don't. Like, I was just talking to the guy that produced the documentary, John Greenhelge, and he was living in New York City at the time, and he remembers this specifically. He had to walk down to the video store when the Pride videotapes were released to get them, and he had to go all the way into Chinatown to get the videotapes. And he goes, it wasn't the best neighborhood, but I was going to get the tapes. You know, it's like that like commitment to like, hey, this is it. Just, you know, a lot of people when they saw it for the first time, it was like, holy shit, what is this? You know, and so it's all good. So I appreciate the history there.
Yeah. You know, I think what it was for us, Mark, and for you, we both grew up as wrestlers. Jimmy took it a little bit further and he wrestled in college. I ended up running competitively in college. But I think for a lot of the old heads, it was that point of entry of wrestling where it was an outlet for wrestlers to actually make some money, because back in the day, it really wasn't any way you could make money as a wrestler. And so that was it for us. It was like, oh, here's a place for wrestlers to go. And not only do they go there, but they're dominating, and they still, you know, it's a little bit evolved to this point, but you still see a lot of wrestlers that come into the sport. And it's an outlet for them. And it's also made wrestling more mainstream. And it's also made people realize that wrestling is a true martial art. Oh God.
You know, like, it's not the best analogy, but you know, like when in Yellowstone, when they took wolves out, you know, and didn't understand, like, wolves were such a keystone species for a healthy environment there, right? Like, everyone just, you know, there was no outlet for wrestlers, so you're kind of quarantined. And now you realize to have a healthy MMA career, man, you have to have the component. You know, you can stand up and be a striker all you want and a banger, and you know, if you don't have just a fundamental understanding of the key components for wrestling, you're going to look silly at some point.
Yeah.
And obviously the Smash Machine was a film that got your name out there and got your story out there. But for wrestlers like us, we knew who you were, right? We knew you were the guy who beat Randy Couture in the NCAAs. Mm-hmm. Do you ever look back on the Smash Machine as something where you not regret, but one of those things where, man, I wish people knew more about my legacy as a wrestler. I wish people saw more of that.
Wow. Yeah, you know, in some capacity, I think I do. And, you know, it was interesting. Kurt Angle was just on Joe Rogan, and we reconnected recently after long, and he was just talking about just that dynamic. And you know, I had a couple of years where I completely dominated him as a wrestler, and then it flipped the script, and he had the two best years, you know, coming off of just some incredible physical stuff he was going through. So most people don't really realize that. They don't understand that, you know, I wrestled at the absolute very highest level of wrestling. And this is nothing to hang my head. It's a, you know, World Cup gold medal, you know, silver medal, Pan Am, you know, it's like I was accomplished. I just didn't accomplish the thing I set out to do, which was to win an Olympic gold medal. but it's a matter of millimeters at that level. It's not a matter of inches.
And you mentioned that, Kurt flipped the script on you, and it's one of those things, especially back then. I don't want to say that you were out of your prime, but those wrestling years were probably some of your better years.
Oh
So
God, yeah.
do you ever look back at that and MMA was on the backside of those, and you look back and say, man, if I really got MMA in my prime, it would have been different. I would have been able to pick up these skills.
Oh man, that's a tough regret. um, I know for a fact I could have had a completely different MMA career. I could have extended it longer. It's one of those where, I try to live in forward motion. So, I like, looking back is fine, and understanding that I have my legacy and it's not for me to judge. It's not for me to, say, oh, if I would only did this, it already is what it is. Right. And I know that wave of wrestlers that came forward at that time, we propelled the sport forward. Coleman and myself, and even Dan Severn and his contribution for the early years, set like, hey, wrestlers, man, they can get in there and they can do this. So there's a lot there to unpack, and it probably won't fit in an hour show, but it's all good.
Do you still follow wrestling at all as a fan?
You know what? I started getting back into it. I have, and my former teammates at Syracuse, which no longer has a program, which that's a whole nother questioning of like, I'm going to pause here for 1 second. Yes, I started following it again. I'm on a text chain with 16 of either guys I coached or wrestled with at Syracuse, and they keep me in the loop. They keep me in the loop because, coming up on wrestling season, they'll have all their predictions. We have our little pool of betting that goes on, and so they've really been able to kind of pull me back in, and that's been the last couple of years. And it's been one of those where, I understand where my passion is. If you want to get me, all lit up and excited, go into a wrestling room, put on some wrestling shoes, and show a 8-year-old kid proper technique on a double. It's what really, passionately, that's still in me.
Do you ever do that?
Yeah, I actually just did it 2 weeks ago. We have a wrestling club here called Thoroughbred, and I was helping a kid out. His name's Evan Waltz, and I've been working with him for the last couple of years, and it's like, it's really cool as a I wouldn't call myself as a coach, but just as a yeah, I guess I'd have to call myself as a coach. It's really unbelievable when you see a kid, the light bulb go on, where he gets it and he understands that, I would tell kids, I said, wrestling is hard. It is one of the hardest things I've ever done. It's voluntary, and you still sign up for it. You still participate in it. And that in and of itself makes you different in a way that other people aren't, and to get these kids to understand that at a young age, and watch that light bulb go on and then push themselves through a point, it's incredible. I mean, it really is. And, it's what makes wrestling just one of my favorite things to talk about and look at.
So you bring up Syracuse, and Rich and I were talking about this prior to the podcast of things to ask you. And Gene Mills, right? For us wrestling guys,
Yeah.
we all know Gene Mills, and we know what he did at Syracuse, what you did at Syracuse. One, why do you think they got rid of the program with such a rich history? And do you think there's ever a chance that something like that could ever come back?
I would have the hope that it would have an opportunity to come back. There's a lot of, like, when it was going on and they were dissolving the program, they dissolved it. It was gone for 2 years, and then they brought it back like in a probationary period for a couple of years. It just didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense. Like, they they were getting so much pushback, but they had already axed the program and the funding was gone. They had set such a ridiculous amount. I think at the time they set like if you guys are able to raise $5 million and we put it in an endowment, the wrestling program can continue. And that was like one of those where at the time it was like, what, you might as well just set 100 million. It just didn't have that kind of base. There's a lot of speculation that they just wanted a coaching change. Ed Carlin had been the coach there forever and a day. At a certain point, he was more of a figurehead. Ed, always was there, always was at practice. Just generally just a straightforward, no nonsense guy. A lot of that was speculation. At the end of the day, it's an easy program to axe. Because at the time, no one was looking. When you factor in Title IX, I know this is a long answer, Jimmy, but when you factor in Title IX and you don't have a women's equivalent sport for football, it just wrecks the whole math equation. You have women's soccer, men's soccer. You have women's gymnastics, men's gymnastics. Now you have women's wrestling, men's wrestling. You don't have women's football, which is, call it 100 scholarships, and then you have no equivalent. So when you factor that in to Title IX, the math just doesn't work. So I think that played a part in it too, and it's unfortunate. It's tragic, actually.
Yeah, like you said, with the addition of women's wrestling now becoming, probably the fastest growing female sport in America right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's, I think, over 150 2-year and 4-year colleges now in the United States that carry wrestling across the board. From
Women's wrestling.
Yeah,
wow.
NAIA Division III, Division II, and now you're starting to see like Iowa, Lock Haven, Presbyterian have Division I programs.
Oh my God, man.
That
is such good news, man.
Yeah.
That is such good news because it's not, it's not a male specific sport. I mean, it just, that actually, I didn't realize that. I knew that it was gaining popularity and traction. I hadn't realized it reached that point. And a lot of what was said back when the Syracuse program was canceled was they're canceling it at the very top, like programs in general. And there wasn't enough of a grass movement to fill spots, meaning that like there wasn't a biddy women's wrestling program. So even if you made scholarships available, there's no women to fill those. So finally, that is incredible. That really actually makes me happy.
Yeah, there's a good possibility that, and I think is Syracuse still in the Big East, or are they in the ACC now? Because ACC wrestling is really good.
Oh my God, it's like that's a whole nother story. Syracuse, believe it or not, the wrestling program remained in the EIWA, Eastern Intercollegiate Wrestling Association, which this was my understanding. It's one of, if not the oldest wrestling conference because it has West Point, so it has Army, it has Navy, and then it has, just Army and Navy in itself have been around forever and a day. So it's been a conference for a long time.
Were you the last national champ for Syracuse?
Oh yeah.
Respect.
Yeah, man. It's just, crazy. It just, there's so many things that, like Gene Mills meeting me when I was in high school was just such a coincidental thing. Where I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, we used to host the World Cup of Wrestling in Toledo, Ohio. And my mom would volunteer every year. I remember as a kid going and wrestling in the biddy programs. We used to have this little trophy on my desk or my nightstand or wherever in my room for the World Cup biddy wrestling program. And so as part of that, Gene came into town to wrestle in the World Cup. My mom volunteered. She was involved in my high school, and she got, I think it was Gene Mills, Bruce Baumgardner, and I'm not going to remember the other one that came to our high school and spoke. And I just won a state championship for my high school, which still to this day is the only one in the history of I think the school's 100 and something years old. And it was that coincidental meeting that precipitated everything that's followed in my life, which is just incredible.
So you mentioned being the only state champ in your school's history, and Rich and I come from a small school, and we still only have one. What do you think set you apart from everyone else at that school? I know you might have spent some time in Iowa at a certain point in high school.
Yeah.
Do you think that had any difference, learning wrestling in Iowa?
Oh my God. Yeah. And this was after my eighth grade, after my eighth grade year, I went and spent time with my oldest brother, who's 12 years older than me. He was finishing school in Iowa, in Bettendorf. And it just so happened to be where Pat Miltage went to high school. So I was a freshman, Pat was a senior, and that's another crossing path, right?
I hope that's in the movie.
Oh, it's got to be, right? Because it just one where, and you know what? And this is the lesson in life that I learned. Pat treated me. I was new. I was, at a school where it was just so heavily sports dominated in every aspect. And Pat was actually a really good dude. And that was one thing I remember through that whole time there. He didn't mind. I was a freshman. He didn't care. In the wrestling room, we wrestled, and it was like a crash course in like throwing you in a combat zone and going, okay, survive. The wrestling, I think that year, and I would have to probably look it up. I think the previous year before I got there, they had won a state championship in wrestling, and I think they won it in football. And so it was like the school. And the wrestling room was, oh my God, it was vicious. It was vicious. I hadn't grown to the size I am now. So I still, I think I wrestled 140 pounds, 145. So I was right. I wrestled Pat often in the wrestling room and wrestled some other guys. It was just such an amazing thing. And that year made all the difference in the world for me.
So how long was it after that year that you and Pat crossed paths again? If ever in the MMA?
No, we did. Gosh, man, I'm going to say it was probably 2 years after he won a UFC belt, I believe. I think it was 2 or 3 years after that. And then I crossed paths with him again when they were trying to get the IFL, International Fight League, going. And there was an event that we had in Iowa, and I got to spend a little bit more time with him and go to his gym and hang out and stuff like that. So there was a couple different intersections, and it's just, the wrestling community in and of itself, like MMA, it's a small world. It's not this huge giant world. It's a small world.
Yeah. And going back to Syracuse, were you and Tom Ryan teammates?
Yeah. Tommy and I came in same year.
Okay.
Same year. And most people don't realize this, and this is a longer tale. So his older brother, Frank Ryan, is an attorney in New York City. So Frank Ryan was 2 years older. Tommy came into school. Tommy and I are the same year. Tommy transferred out after his sophomore year. No one could understand it. Nobody could understand it. And his dad got it. Frank got it and went to Iowa, and the rest is history. When I started MMA, my first flight's Brazil. I signed a contract after that with the UFC to do 3 tournaments. So I did 2 tournaments, 14 and 15, and I still had a 3rd tournament on the contract. After the 2nd tournament, Pride contacted me and said, we want to bring you over. So I flew over to Japan. I ended up getting a bunch of pictures taken and all this stuff, and coming back to the States, I signed a contract to fight Royce Gracie in Pride number 2. When I got back to the States, probably 4 or 5 days later, I get a knock on the door. I'm being served with a summons to appear in New York City, where the UFC was incorporated for breach of contract. Frank Ryan, Tommy's brother, represented me in the litigation to litigate the contract. So Frank was a graduate assistant at Syracuse. He went to law school at Syracuse. And so it's just one of those coincidental things where I'm like, I don't know any attorneys in New York. And at the time, at the beginning in MMA, the UFC contract was $25,000 for a tournament. And that money was spent before I got in the ring. So after the second one, that money was spent. And and the New York City attorneys are not cheap. They're very expensive. But he represented me and he litigated it out, and I got out of the contract.
So you bring up that Tom Ryan's brother was your lawyer, and back in those days, that was the human cockfighting era of MMA.
Oh God,
and you being a guy who was a very good wrestler, a college educated guy, was there? And I know you didn't start fighting until after your mom passed. Was there any reserve of what am I getting into? Is this legal? Am I going to get in trouble doing this?
Oh, you know what? It didn't really hit me until I actually did my first UFC event, and it was down in, I think the first one was in Mississippi, and it was in a parking lot where they had, I'm totally serious, they had like a tent they put up and a ring in it, and the dressing rooms were trailers, and it was on sovereign ground where there was no commission or anything. And that's was the, oh shit, like this is, wow, this is like, we're out here, and it was a pay-per-view event, televised, it's had all these different elements to it, but it felt very seedy. Like literally, like if you were, in a gambling hall in the speakeasy, and the cops were going to break in at any minute. So it did have that feeling to it. It's just crazy to even think about it now. It's a little bit crazy.
And one thing that Rich said in the Smash Machine that kind of stood out to us is they made it feel like when you were in Japan, you were fighting in stadiums and you were fighting in these big arenas. What was the difference between that and being in the States or being over here where it was smaller and shady? Did it feel like a bigger spectacle? Did it feel like there's more honor in it, that it was more credible?
Yes. I mean, credible is probably the accurate word for it. It felt like, like it was absolutely legitimized in a lot of different capacities. The crowds that watch it are very, they understand really the dynamic of what's going on. They have more of appreciation. And I think I've said this in interviews before. It's like, you imagine like when I was in elementary school, we were playing, Red Rover, send Mark over, and over in Japan, they were doing some kind of martial arts in elementary school. They incorporated it into their curriculum. And so they have a completely different understanding of mixed martial arts or its origin or its place. And so they had definitely a different reverence. And yes, they were doing stadiums. The Tokyo Dome, and I think it's not Sobu Dome, but it's been a minute since I've even thought about this. But Tokyo Dome was the first big one that, like, Pride 4 that I did where I fought Hugo Duarte. There was like 65,000 people there. And it's crazy because when you look up, all you see is just a wall of people from horizon to sky. It's really incredible. It's really incredible.
And how does that compare to wrestling in the NCAA finals?
Oof. I just told the story the other day. It's like, who I warmed up with prior to me going out was Kevin Randleman. So Kevin Randleman wrestled 177 pounds. I wrestled 190. And I think the guy he wrestled was a guy from I think it was from Oklahoma, and I think his last name was Olson. But Kevin and I are warming up. I mean, we're the last couple of guys to go, and Kevin and I knew each other by name, and by him wrestling in high school. And I think Kevin had taken second the year before, and he literally, after we're done warming up, he goes, "It'll be quick. Be ready." And literally was running through the tunnel, goes up onto the stage. He goes out there, and I'm still breaking a sweat, jumping up and down, and I hear the crowd pop and then quiet, and then I see Kevin running back through the tunnel, and I'm like, holy shit, what just I had to go back and watch it on film and talk to Kevin after the shit. But it was like literally, he goes, "It'll be quick." Goes out there, does it, and then once I got up and got in it, it's probably one of the best moments of my entire life, because I had chased this thing my whole life. To that point, I had chased this thing, and I finally got it. And it was that moment that I didn't have this need to continue to chase something. It was just a moment. I look back on it and going, all the other things that I've done, it still resonates as probably, the one of the best moments in my life. It just gave me a sense of peace and satisfaction that, very few things since then have.
Do you feel like you've ever had a hunger for anything like you did that NCAA title, or has everything else kind of been secondary after you got that?
Oh boy. Yeah, that's, I would say similar to it, but not exactly. It was Abu Dhabi. It was after my first year Abu Dhabi, and then the second year when I won my weight class and then won the all around. When I got done with my weight class and started the all around, it literally, I knew that I could. It's really hard. It's really difficult to do because your final. I think my final is, it's like 20 minutes. You do like it's just a long physical exertion. So you do your weight class, and then let me give you just a rough example. So like on Thursday, say you do 3 matches, and then on Friday you have your weight class final, and then they take, the 5 weight classes in ADCC at the time, and they take the top 3 guys out of each weight class, and they put those guys in a tournament. And that determines the best all around, grappler in the world. And so that was probably second to the NCAAs, how that feeling is. But second for the NCAAs, it might be, a big divide, because I just chased it for a lot longer, the NCAAs, than I did, that particular championship.
Mark, after college, you were chasing that Olympic dream, looking for, chasing the pursuit of the gold medal. And you had the opportunity, if I'm correct, you got to be a part of Foxcatcher.
Yeah.
We've talked to Rob Cole recently about his, he just got the coaching job at UNC, but we talked to him about Dave and that. I was curious if you had any stories or anything you want to share with us about that.
Sure. So my mentor was a guy named Chris Campbell. Chris Campbell was on the Olympic team with Gene Mills and Lee Kemp, and just a litany of who's who in the foundation of American wrestling. So Chris, after my NCAA championship, he went on to the Olympics, 37 years old. He wins a bronze medal in the Olympics in Barcelona. After that, Chris basically said, I need to get you another coach. You know, I've taken you as far as I possibly could take you, and I need you to transition to the next level. And to transition to the next level and understand freestyle, I'm going to introduce you to Dave Schultz. And so we were at Syracuse and went down to the farm and stayed at Dave's house and spent like a week down there. And that was kind of the beginning of the transition of like Chris handing me off to Dave. So that was, let's see, that would have been 93. And so in 93, I get on my first national tours, which is overseas and stuff. And you know, leading up to the nationals that year, it was, you know, I thought I was ready. So I wrestle in the freestyle nationals in 93 and I lose to John Llewellyn twice. In Illinois, John Llewellyn beat Kurt Angle. One of Kurt's years, he took second. And I lose to him twice. And so the only way I'm going to actually get acclimated or get on Foxcatcher is to either make the world team or win the nationals. At the time, DuPont wouldn't take basically strays in. You know, you had to prove that you were worthy of wrestling for Foxcatcher. And then that year, at the World Team Trials, I won the World Team Trials. And I beat Kurt in the pool. Kurt Trost, Michigan guy, was the national champ that year. So he sat outside. So it was one of those things where, you know, I spent from 93, 94, and 95 at Foxcatcher. You know, I had 3 years where I went down there, you know, all the time. You know, I spent time down there with another guy named Rob Calabrese. Rob had a house down there. I usually stay with Rob. In 94, we had the World Team Trials down there, or not the World Team Trials, I'm sorry. We had the World Training Camp at Foxcatcher. And I stayed everyone called it the big house. You know, I stayed in John's house, which is, at the time, it was really, I didn't understand the complexity of it, that when John's mom died, John moved into his mom's room, and the room he occupies right across the hallway. And the only other person that stayed in that room was Mark Schultz. And he asked me if I wanted to stay in the big house. I'm like, sure, stay in the big house. I get all my meals cooked for me. You know, I get servants and, you know, blah, 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 blah. So, you know, I spent a lot of time down there. And, you know, prior to what happened to Dave, you know, that was the place to go. That was the place to go, man. It had everything. You know, you can go for a run, you know, on the property. It had great training facilities. It had, you know, great equipment. You know, John started creating this thing back then when you had laser discs that were this big, right? He started to create a computer system called Domination. And what you could do is you could pop a VHS tape in there. It was hooked to a computer, and you could take the laser disc, which he had filmed from all over the world. And you can say, okay, I'm going to wrestle Kadartsev, a Russian wrestler. I'm going to see all the 3-point moves that he hit this year. And it would pull them up on the laser disc, and you could transfer that to your VHS tape and take that home to study. You know, at the time, it was so state of the art. I mean, it had so much stuff. The last conversation I had with Dave was right actually at the end of 95. And everyone was kind of fearful that they would lose their funding. They would lose their stipends. And, you know, I said, Dave, is everything going to be okay? He says, listen, just worry about wrestling. I got everything handled here. And then I took a trip over to Russia to wrestle in Siberia in January. And the national team coach was there, Bruce
Barnett.
Barnett, thank you. He was there, and he pulls us out of our rooms at like, I don't know, 3 a.m. And we all gather in a circle in the hotel. And he's just like, I got some terrible news. And for whatever reason, before he even said it, you know, there was this gut feeling of like, no. Like, no. And he said, you know, John DuPont shot and murdered Dave Schultz. And I just, it's, it's one of those things I don't talk very much about. It's just, it's not that, enough time has passed, but it's just one of those things where it's like, it was brutal. It was fucking it was brutal. And, because of Dave's affection for the Russian culture and wrestling, and he spoke fluent Russian. When they made that announcement in the arena, I'll never, ever forget. It was a collective gasp. Like you hear the whole crowd just like nobody could believe it. I was supposed to fly from Russia to Philadelphia to continue training to get ready for, the Olympics, the nationals. And yeah, it was tough. Brutal.
Was he a true diplomat of the sport in your eyes?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, he just there wasn't anything about him that was he just loved the sport to a way where he could sit and talk about the most minute things in wrestling, a grab, a hold, a finger lock, a this or that. He was a diplomat in every sense of the word. He didn't have an agenda. He just wanted to represent the sport. And it's really funny, Dave's story. This is a Schultz story. So part of me getting to meet Dave, we sit down and it's his family round, and we're eating and stuff, and we sit down afterward, and it's just like, it's like, Dave, I didn't know at the time he spoke fluent Russian, and he starts speaking Russian. I was like, what the hell? And he goes, yeah, I learned Russian. And we start talking about why I learned Russian and all this stuff. He goes, I learned Russian because I wanted to understand what the coaches were saying to the wrestlers. I wanted to get an idea of like how they coach them and how they train them. And I'm like, oh, dude, I'm like, wow, that's incredible. And he goes, you know what I found out? And I'm like, what? He goes, they're going, go, harder, faster, harder, harder. I go, okay, that's awesome. That's awesome. And there's no secret sauce there.
Yeah.
So anyways,
ain't that the Wizard of Oz moment?
Oh my God, man, for sure. And it just, he understood though that like in MMA now, man, all the guys from Kazakhstan and Dagestan and that whole region, it's like they start at such a young age, and just culturally, man, it's a different animal. It's a completely different, brand of wrestling, and it's very meticulous and dominating and physical, so, I still have fond memories from Foxcatcher, and I still have a box, and it has my Foxcatcher towel and my singlets, and when it was working, it was amazing till it wasn't.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah, that's a long answer again.
No, that's what we're here for.
No, Mark, that's part of the reason why we wanted to have you on, because prior to reaching out to you, I saw a podcast with you. I don't know if there's an MMA promotion that you're working with now, but they were doing some interviews, and then you were mentioned on the Joe Rogan podcast with Kurt, and Rich and I were, man, we need to talk to Mark Kerr. And one thing you said on that podcast with that gentleman was you got to a point in your life after you had your trials with drugs where you were taking it a second at a time. It was moment by moment by moment. Did your wrestling and fighting help you through those times?
Oh, there's no way I get through that. They call it moments of clarity, right? Like I get to a point where, realistically, the analogy is I'm in the fight of my life, even though it's self-inflicted, right? Because the hardest person I've ever had to fight is myself, right? And so, for sure, having the background and having the ability to get through those moments. Oh, it's 100% based on, what my experiences were through fighting and wrestling. And, it's one of those, it's so prevalent now, like the documentary now takes on a whole different tone, considering everything that's gone on with the Sacklers and that whole shit show, and, what they've, what's been created in now it's like everybody, you're fighting for your life, man. You really are, and without having the background I have, forget it. There have been moments where I would just say, you know what the fuck, fuck it.
And being such a high caliber athlete and someone who's achieved at the highest levels, what do you, looking back on, what do you say to the younger wrestler, the younger fighter who doesn't think they can get caught in something like that thinks that because they have a certain mindset that they're free from it? Because I think and we know that is not the truth. It can happen to anyone.
Oh my God, man. Like just addiction in general, it's non-discriminatory. It doesn't care about your socioeconomic status, doesn't care about your race, your culture, your background, your occupation. It doesn't really care about, it doesn't care about that. Once you step over the line, there's no stepping back. There's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube. So a lot of guys, just and this is unfortunate, man. It really, be careful of doctors that, there's no quick way back from an injury. That's, part of my own drive to be the best that I can be. I look for shortcuts when I shouldn't have, right? I go, okay, I know I'm a little injured. I know I should stay off this for, another week or so. But, if I take this, man, I can actually get back in and start doing what I need to do, not realizing that, one, I'm chewing my body up, like a road grader, two, there are no shortcuts. There really are no shortcuts, man. It is the times that I've taken the long way there that I appreciate more than anything else. More than anything else. There is no shortcut. There is no magic pill, man. There's nothing it's going to get you there. Just be careful of doctors. And I hate to say that, because, some physicians still have an agenda, and they'll write you a script for whatever. I manage most of my pain now with Motrin, because it's Motrin and ice. And, it's just there's better ways to go about things than pharmaceuticals, and just be careful of, just a mindset where you feel you need to push through something. There's moments when you do, but there's other moments where you need to give yourself a little bit of a break and understand that your body's asking for rest. It's asking, hey, listen, I need a timeout, man. And you're allowed to take it. You're allowed to take it. And that's the one thing that I, understand in retrospect, that I put so much pressure on myself to perform in MMA that, I was looking for any way to just get to the next thing. So
thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you, Jimmy. I mean, it's one where, I still think the wrestling community is underserved. Like anything else, man, it just doesn't have the, it's getting the respect it deserves. It's getting the prominence it deserves, and I couldn't be prouder at this moment in time to have a cauliflower ear, to be a wrestler. The guys on TV, man, you think 15 years ago they would have let those guys, they would have said, no, you got to wear headphones, guys, you got to cover those things up, makeup, it's like, guy, it's just, we're a tough bunch of dudes, man. Doesn't matter if you wrestle elementary school, biddy, doesn't matter where you wrestled. If you participated in wrestling, forget it, man. You just, like I said earlier, man, you're just a little bit different than the guy next to you.
Yeah, no doubt. Mark, you got the poster of the Smashing Machine behind you. And Jimmy
Yeah.
mentioned earlier when we watched it. And I think when we, when it first came out and we got the VHS, we were just super excited to watch a wrestler and his MMA career. And we see what unfolds in the documentary. And I don't want to assume anything, but I feel like that necessarily wasn't what the original plan was for the documentary. So at what point, if at any, did you just say, F it, this is my life, this is who I am, this is where I'm at? Or did it just, you were so much into a tailspin that you weren't really realizing what was going on as it was going on while they were filming?
I just talked to John Greenhalgh, whose idea this was. He had what he wanted to show. I just talked to him like 5 days ago about this same kind of topic, right? He wanted to show the dichotomy. He wanted to show he knew what kind of caliber competitor I was. And then once he saw me in MMA, he's like, oh, dude, I didn't know that side was in him. Because on the other side of it, here's this, this is John's words, not mine, because I'm going to compliment him. So here's this, well-spoken, intelligent, dude. And then he flips a switch and he's this other guy. So that's what he originally set out to kind of show, is just the origins of the sport. I'm involved with it. And that was kind of it. And then obviously it morphed into something else. Part of what transpired, part of it, yeah, I was a little bit out of it. And, I figured no one's going to know. I'm going to have the film crew come into my world and they're not going to know that I'm, on drugs and I'm doing opiates and da-da-da-da-da. That's the delusional part, that I thought that I could conceal this thing from an intimate circle of people. On the other side of it, there was a moment where John Greenhalgh puts the camera down and we go in my bedroom actually, and we sit down and we just talk. And the conversation was it was lengthy. In that film crew there was 4 guys, Steve, Neil, another John Hines, and John Greenhalgh. John Greenhalgh I wrestled with at Syracuse, so there's that wrestling connection. And it was just like, him telling me, going, realistically at the time, not understanding it completely, he's like, I think this could help a lot of people. He goes, I think it can. And he goes, Mark, if there's one thing I do know, I know how to tell a story, and I know how to put this out there where if you trust me from this point going forward, I promise you that this is going to be something that's going to be life-changing. And it wasn't those exact words, but it was, do you trust me? And I answered, yeah. And at that point, he's like, what are you really doing? And I just opened up to him and I said, well, this is really it. And I think at that moment, it was my, cry for help. It was like, here's what I'm doing, man. I don't know how to get out of it. I don't know why I can't stop doing it. I don't know why when I stop doing it, I get sick. I go through dope withdrawals. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know any of that stuff. I didn't know, how physically dependent I was, other than when I didn't have it, I'd go into panic attacks, and panic attacks and, not understanding of like, physically my body withdraws from it and has a bunch of consequences that go with it. But I'll forever be in debt for John, being there at that moment. I think that was, it was a huge turning point, for me, because it put a pause button on my life, which I hadn't had one. When Jimmy was asking about how, the feeling in the NCAA championship, right? That was a pause for a second. I had that relief, and then, it's that unsettling part as that night progressed. I enjoyed that night, and I got up the next day and it felt like I had something more to do. So,
Do you think it saved your life?
I think it did.
Yeah.
I think it did. And I still was trying to control the situation. I absolutely completely after that moment, the film crew, we spoke off camera, and it was like, okay, hey, let's get you help. And I was like, okay, I know a doctor. It's like I had read some stuff on the internet in a chat room or a blog. In 1999, they just didn't have much. I think I might dial up network or whatever it was. And so I had gotten a hold of a doctor, and I had heard this thing, methadone. And I thought that would be the way to wean myself off of this, and then just continue on what I was doing, and not understanding the severity of complications that can come up, and what I had to be. Yeah, I'm not a doctor. I tried to play one many times in my life, but it doesn't work out very well. So I went to a friend of mine that's a physician, and he prescribed, X, Y, and Z. And, I didn't understand the mechanism with methadone. It's a really long acting opiate. And I was used to these spikes, where you take something or you inject something and you get a spike. And I wasn't getting that feeling. And I was like, oh, fuck. And so I took more and more and more and more. And then all of a sudden, once it kicked into my system, it was almost fatal.
Yeah.
You mentioned that pause button after the NCAAs and feeling like you didn't have much of a pause after that. Is there such thing, knowing what you know now, is there such thing as that pause button, or as someone who is goal driven, does there have to be something next? Does there have to be something to keep people in that mindset going? Because I have the same problem in my life. I just graduated college, and it was one of those things where I was like, oh man, I put so much on doing this, and I did it. It's like, well, what now?
Yeah. Oh my God, it's a void. It's literally I'm so, a lot of what my experience was with, like, winning a state championship in Ohio, AAA, God, there are so many good wrestlers that have come out of Ohio. And, to be able to do that in high school was incredible. Immediately after, same thing, I felt like this sense that I just had to. And, through the NCAAs, and part of what two things here, I'll explain. Part of the understanding of myself is, yes, to be goal driven, to try to not hear the narrative of somebody else going, oh my God, you got so much talent. You should have won this year. You should have won this year. You should have graduated college right after high school. You should have done this. You said, all these different things that I would listen to people's narratives of what I should be and what I should be doing. And I think that was part of my drive, was to, like, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to take the next step. I should have watched this. I'm going to do this. And it's difficult, Jamie. It's really difficult because, to be now, put it this way, now I'm passion driven, right? Instead of goal driven. I still have things I want to accomplish, but the things that I really light me up are things that I feel passionately about. And that's what kind of gets me up and drives me. And not money orientated, not, of course I want to make money because I want to be able to utilize that to be able to do the passion that I have, which is outreach in, Phoenix and the recovery community. I'm starting, I drop bikes and bags and stuff off at a recovery center, and I do it, every couple months, I'll gather up a couple bikes and I gather up a bunch of backpacks and bags and stuff. And that's passion, because I can see it in somebody's face when they're, just sober and they're trying to figure it out, man. And it's like this insurmountable, like, world they have to scale. And sometimes helping out in the littlest capacity gives them that little bit of thing called hope, that somebody cares. So that's the stuff that drives me now. Still goal orientated, but not as much as back then.
Passion driven. I like that. I'm gonna steal that from you if you don't mind, Mark.
Take it, man.
I like that. I like
Take
that
it,
a lot.
man.
Mark, I got one last thing for you here, and then we got a couple standard questions we ask all our guests. But we were scheduled to talk last week, and the message came through that you had to take a very important call. So we've talked a lot about the journey of Mark Kerr and your life. Fairly recently, I guess within the last year or two, The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, has come into the picture.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Whatever you can.
Yeah, a
talk to
little
us
bit about,
just
part of the phone call was just a catch up, just to it's really funny. And I joke about it. I go, I've had the Rock's cell phone number for years and I just have never called it. It's like, he's a busy dude. So that was part of like, dude, I'm sorry, man. When he's got the time, I need to take it, make it fit in, and it was a catch up. It's just one of those things where I hadn't spoke with him in a while since he made the announcement he was gonna do a biopic, I guess you would call it, kind of mirrored off of the Smashing Machine documentary. And he still wants to do the project. There's still uncertainty about like how all of it's going to come together, if it's going to come together, when it's going to come together. But it was just one of those conversations where it really, he paid me just some great compliments, man. When you have somebody that I look up to and I respect, for a lot of different reasons, we were talking about how a lot of times, somebody wants to put you in a box. They want, one of the things people used to say to me way back is they would see me coming in that big body, my MMA body, and then hear me start speaking. And I don't have a loud booming voice. I have this, very subtle voice, I should say. And they would go, "Oh my God, you speak really well." And then the first thing I would hear is like, "What did you think? I was a mumbling, bumbling fucking idiot?" Even though they're paying me a compliment, right? So DJ and I were talking about how, through his whole career, they try to put him in a box. You're just a pro wrestler. You're just an action, actor. I can't do anything else. You just, in a label or a box doesn't fit either one of us. As an MMA fighter, it's not who I am, it's what I did, right? I'm a wrestler, it's what I did, but it's made me who I am in a lot of ways, so, there's a lot of things there that are, we just had a really good conversation, and, there's hopes that at some point, everything come together in the universe, to make that a reality where, he can actually produce, direct, act. I'm not sure how it's going to all turn out, but, it's still on the table. That's what the good part is.
Well, we're pulling for you. We're putting out good vibes and energy to make that happen.
Good, man.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. That's, it just, in a lot of that, it brings, brings into focus a lot of different things, man. It makes me smile when I think about it, because it just seems it almost seems detached from me. Like, I don't think you could go in very many places in the world and people wouldn't know who Dwayne Johnson is. I think it'd be hard to find, remote Mongolian goat herders. They probably still have a fake WWE belt, somewhere in their little jubby hut, you know. So,
Uh,
you know, so it's you know, the whole thing's you know, been an incredible journey.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. What are the questions?
We got the final four, sir. This is how we finish every interview. 4 standard questions we ask all our guests. First question is,
Okay.
are you a coffee drinker?
No,
Okay.
I drink Monster energy drinks.
All right. What's your monster of choice? All right.
I have a trash can full of them. And you know what, man? I used to love getting up in the morning and making coffee. It was kind of that morning routine. And the gal I'm dating, she's a Monster girl. And so I was like, okay, I'll try it. And it just was like, okay, get a little bit more, you know, jolt.
All right.
You stick with the same flavor all the time?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yes, I do.
Right on. Mark, do you have any practices or rituals that you do on a regular basis to show up as the strongest version of Mark Kerr?
Oof. You know, so my girlfriend is a Nichiren Buddhist. And so Nichiren Buddhists, they chant. And it's Nam Myoho Renge Ko is the chant. And so I do chant with her. And it does help me get centered in a way that I didn't think it would. You know, I reluctantly started participating in it. And then I was like, huh, this is actually, it's actually cool. And then I started doing transcendental meditation. The Beatles were most famous for it. They wrote a whole entire, I think it was the White Album, when they were over in India with the guru from that does transcendental meditation. It's just, it's taking your conscious thoughts out of it so you can transcend your consciousness and get to deeper levels in yourself, you know? So those are the two things that help quiet things down for me and help me to be able to focus on things that I want to do.
Very cool. It's crazy the things we'll do for women, isn't it?
Oh boy. Just about anything.
Ain't that the truth? Mark, what are you listening to right now? Music, podcasts, audiobooks? Are you reading anything?
So I'm listening to an audiobook right now. Oddly enough, it was something that unintentional. And this was I'm going to pull it up so I get the name right. So it's called 101 Essays That Will Change the Way You Think. And it's written by Brianna Rist, I think it is, W-E-I, God, I need glasses, W. It's 101 Essays That Will Change the Way You Think. And started listening to it. It's free if you have Audible, you know. So really incredible, just these little tidbits and sayings and insights and perspectives and just really actually interesting, beyond what I thought it would be interesting, you know, to the point where I'm like, you know, I'm going to listen to the whole thing. Really good stuff.
Awesome. Check that out, especially if it's free on Audible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mark, last one we got for you. Do you have a guilty pleasure or guilty pleasures?
Oh, I have guilty pleasure. And you know what it is? That makes it worse.
Let's
Jelly
go.
Yeah. Let's go.
Dude, these are like my sugar crack, man, I swear. And you know, it's one of those things where it's like they're so small, but they're so good. And it's just one of those things where they become easily addictive. And so I have to be careful with it. But that's my guilty little pleasure, man.
Okay. Do you have a favorite flavor?
Oh man, two things that they have, like they have a toasted marshmallow, and then they have a peach. You know, it's they're actually Make my mouth water thinking about it.
Yeah.
These little tiny candies, you know.
Have you
That's
ever
it.
seen the Bean Boozled?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay, so you have to look for them. I wouldn't maybe not recommend you trying them, but they have Jelly Belly makes them, and they have
Okay.
it's a bag similar to that, but they have
Gross
like
flavors.
12 of their like traditional flavors, and then it's
Yeah.
12 like really gross flavors, but they're like identical in color and everything. So
Oh my
it's almost
God,
like
man.
playing Russian roulette where you're like pulling them out and you don't know if you're going to get like, like the buttered popcorn
Dirty
one.
sock or
Yeah,
something.
exactly.
Oh my God, that's devious, man.
Yeah.
Bean boozled.
Yeah.
I'll just stay away from those
Yeah,
for
definitely.
sure. Just gonna thank you guys for having me on. I mean, I really do appreciate it.
Well,
It's an honor and a pleasure.
Mark, before we end this interview, where can all the people find you? We know you got a business out there. We know you do outreach. Where can people find you if they want to contact you?
So I'm redoing all my social media right now. They could post something on my Instagram, which is just Mark Kerr TSM, the Smashing Machine TSM. I have finally got my URL. I finally got markkerr.com. So that'll be up here in a little bit. Me and my girlfriend, we have a flooring company. It's called Get Grounded Flooring. Like grounded, like I'm finally grounded in, recovery and all that. And, if someone wants to reach out to me, I mean, they can always just shoot me an email. It's mkerr@getgroundedflooring.com. And, I usually, get back with you in a reasonable amount of time. So, anybody out there that, it needs help or whatever, I can point you in the right direction if I can't help you myself, man.
Can they get in touch with you for wrestling clinics?
Yeah, that's the other one that I'm finally up and running where I actually could do. I was surprised, when I got on the mat. I'm like, okay, it's like, it just took all that stuff is built into me now. Even though in older age, it's just like I still have all the reactions, all the, it's amazing when you get on a mat how instinctively your body just kind of does.
Yeah.
And you're reacting. So, yeah, they can contact me on Instagram if you want me to come do a clinic. Always DM me. I'll get back with you.
Awesome.
Mark, thank you so
Yeah.
much. Not to put you over too much, but they say don't meet your heroes, and you're someone that Rich and I, like I said, we bonded over the Smasher Machine back in our aunt's basement back in the day. It's been tremendous talking to you, and keep doing your thing because you're an inspiration, and every time you talk, that motivation just comes off of you. So keep doing it. Thank you.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you again, guys. And, we'll revisit this, man. As stuff comes up, man, I'll jump back on with you guys, and, we'll just, it's one of those where I always appreciate it, man. Thank you again.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. It's an honor, pleasure to talk with you and meet you, and glad to see you're kicking butt and taking names.
I appreciate it, guys, man. Thanks, Richie. Thanks, Jimmy. We'll talk
Yes,
soon.
Take care,
Thanks,
bud.
guys.
Sir.
Bye. Thank you.